Sir Isaac Newton was an undisputed genius and perhaps the greatest scientist ever to live. At the time of his death in 1727, his contemporaries regarded him as a natural philosopher extraordinaire. He is frequently depicted in high school classrooms as a man with great reasoning capabilities and is easily identified by his prematurely white hair. However, Newton was in fact a complex figure who was both celebrated and reviled by the scientific community during points in his career. Some, such as his longtime rival Robert Hooke, viewed him with sheer vitriol and contempt. But he was also a man who made unparalleled discoveries and who greatly benefited from the work of those before him, such as Galileo. In this video, we will seek to uncover the real Sir Isaac Newton. Legend has it that Newton came up with his theory of gravity after being knocked in the head by an apple outside his family home in Woolsthorpe, where he took refuge during a plague. While scientists dispute the particulars of this story, the apple incident does in fact illustrate Newton's law of universal gravitation, which Newton would eventually publish in his Principia. This law states that every particle in the universe attracts every other particle with a force directly proportional to the product of their masses and inversely proportional to the square of the distance between them. The direction of this force is along the line joining the particles. Newton's law can be expressed through the following equation. The gravitational force equals g m1 m2 over r squared. In this case, m1 represents the mass of the first object, m2 represents the mass of the second object, r represents the distance between the centers of mass, and g is the universal gravitational constant. It is important to note that this equation represents the attraction between all of the individual particles of the bodies, as opposed to the bodies as wholes. Additionally, while every object in the universe with a mass attracts every other object according to this law, the size of the force becomes minuscule for objects that are far away. For example, although the Sun is roughly 1,000,000 times more massive than the Earth, its pull on the Earth is quite small due to its great distance from the planet. Thus, Newton's law of universal gravitation encompasses the inverse square law, as the force of attraction of both bodies is inversely proportional to the square of the distance that separates them. Most natural philosophers prior to Newton, including René Descartes, believed that the universe functioned like a giant machine, and that all motions in the universe could be described as the physical interactions of parts of this machine. Newton was the first scientist to make the revolutionary claim that an invisible force called gravity was responsible for the motion on Earth as well as in outer space. Newton believed, for example, that gravity not only pulled apples down to Earth, but also kept the moon in orbit around the Earth. This observation provided a new way for scientists to contemplate the very essence of motion itself. During his time in Woolsthorpe, Newton experienced what is today regarded as his annus mirabilis, or miraculous year, when he made several astounding discoveries. One of these was his formulation of the binomial theorem. Another was his invention of the mathematical field of calculus, which Newton created in an attempt to discern how quantities are constantly changing. It is important to note that German mathematician Gottfried Leibniz independently developed a system of calculus around the same time as Newton. In fact, this sparked a controversy in the late 17th century, as both took credit for aspects of each other's ideas. Today, both are credited with the discovery of calculus. Newton's discovery of the heterogeneity of white light was perhaps his most significant breakthrough at Woolsthorpe. Newton proved that white light is comprised of different colors by sending a stream of light through two prisms. Whereas scientists from Aristotle to Descartes had previously believed that white light is pure, Newton showed that it is comprised of all the colors of the rainbow. Interestingly, Newton's paper on light was his first major work to receive criticism from Robert Hooke, who further voiced his disapproval of Newton when he published his laws of motion in the Principia. Newton's disdain for Hooke's criticism shows that he was a much more impulsive figure than one might have expected. Despite Newton's brilliance, detractors such as Hooke attempted to alienate Newton from the Royal Society. Around this time, Newton also delved into the pseudo-scientific field of alchemy, an area to which he would devote a large portion of his career. While Newton may have pursued alchemy to gain real scientific insight into some of the otherwise inexplicable laws of nature, Hooke likened Newton's theory of gravity to an occult philosophy. Newton's steadfast opposition to the Christian Trinity is another example of his stubbornness. Newton maintained throughout his life that Christ was the Son of God, not his equal. This belief greatly jeopardized his career, as fellows at Cambridge were generally required to become ministers in the Church of England. Although Newton envisioned a universe where God was present, he at the same time viewed religion and science as inseparable. Newton therefore believed that the only way to appreciate the truth of God was to uphold his convictions. Nonetheless, after experiencing a nervous breakdown in 1692, Newton emerged as a changed man. During the rest of his life, he transformed himself from something of an outcast into a well-regarded figure of high society. He eventually was appointed Master of the Mint in London, became a member of Parliament, and was knighted. He published his last major work, Optics, in 1704, a year after Hooke's death. Newton's extraordinary transformation can be viewed as him embracing the world that he once eschewed. While he initially had the most professional success at his home in Woolsthorpe, far away from the vices of Cambridge, he eventually accepted his role in high society. By the time of his death in 1727, his religious beliefs and infatuation with alchemy were largely forgotten. Today, Isaac Newton is understood as a complicated figure whose life was influenced by religion, science, and alchemy. While Newton was indeed a genius, and some see him as the founder of modern science, he was not always as sensible a person as many believe. It is therefore best to look at Newton the way he was, rather than the way society wants him to be.